a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Who Got the Assist, Season 7. This is Episode 5, and it's the final pod of pre-season, Sam. Yay! I'm Tom.
We
I'm
made
here
it.
I know. God. Anyway, more of that in a second. I'm Tom. I'm here with a beer. Thanks for joining us. A special welcome to new listeners. I'll stop doing that soon, I promise. Existing listeners. Lots of stuff already done in pre-season, so do go back and catch up if you like what you hear. But otherwise, we hope you'll be on board with us for the rest of the season. We really value you listening, because otherwise, what's the point in doing a podcast, hey? I'm joined by Sam, as always. You were right. A big opening win for free passing Saints this weekend. So you're repping the Saints kit as well on YouTube. Worth doing, wasn't it? Something mad like the first half. You set some sort of record, didn't you?
Yeah, you're ruining my opening monologue. Yeah, we're records breaking for Saints. I'm repping double Saints at the moment. I've got the background and I've got the kit on. Feeling very attached to Southampton after Friday night's curtain raiser for the Football League. It was just nice to actually be able to enjoy a match where I'm supporting the team doing well, which has felt like a rarity in the last few seasons. So maybe we found our level again for a little bit. And a new style of play. Really happy with it. But because we're not in the Prem, we can't really talk about them too much. So I won't dwell on the absolute fantastic performance that Saints had at the weekend too much. So moving on, we are Who Got the Assist. You can find Tom at the main account on Twitter, or X as it's now called, at WGTA_FPL. You can find that account on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL. And you can find me at FPL Pricey on all of the aforementioned, plus on YouTube as well, if you wanted to. The mini league code, I don't know when we're going to lock it, but we usually lock it a few weeks into the season. So do make sure you get in before it's too late. The mini league code this season is MINLUD. So do get into that before it's too late. We've got a little trophy for the winner, so make sure you get involved. On today's pod, we're going to be doing a little bit of bits and pieces, wrapping up the preseason, a few good talking points from the Community Shield as well. Tom has put together some really interesting data on what we can expect from game week 1. Are there going to be a few more goals, perhaps? And we're also going to run through a few of our own bold claims. So things could get a bit spicy later on, because we put together, I think it's 3 bold claims each, which we'll go into later on. And some bold claims for game week 1 as well, which we brought the community into as well. We're also obviously going to run through what looks like narrowing down into finalish drafts. It will be the final main pod, at least, until game week 1. So it would be wrong of us not to at least have a look at where our teams are currently at. No spoilers, but you can tell that we've got similar mindsets. So we'll go into that a little bit later on. But yeah, you can probably guess that they're not too dissimilar, as a lot of the community is at the moment as well.
Yeah, definitely. So a bit of an odds and sods week, really. Just as Sam said, tying up some loose ends with the opening game week nigh upon us now. Starting off though, Community Shield happened on Sunday, a major domestic trophy for Arsenal. Very early on, Sam. Declan Rice, lucky boy, second major trophy in 3 months after securing a major European trophy of West Ham in the Conference League in his last act as a Hammer in June. So yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting game. One for the tactical enthusiasts, I felt. I mean, what did you think of it? And before I kind of recount my story of watching it.
Yeah, it was for the purists a little bit, wasn't it? I thought City were dominant in parts, but Arsenal rallied well. I think there have been quite a few questions about Arsenal's defensive solidity going into this season and whether or not we can trust that defense. And I think that helped answer quite a few questions there. They looked fairly sturdy. Haaland didn't really get a sniff. I think he had a 0.00 XG, which is rare for a player of his ability. So Arsenal were doing a number on him at the very least. City possibly, and they do this most seasons, come in a little bit undercooked. and might not be quite at the races yet. Maybe there's an opportunity there, but they are still City at the end of the day, and it took a deflection to take it into penalties. So not that I'm saying Arsenal were lucky by any means, but it was a tight game. City still are doing City things. It's just maybe they're only at 70-80% at the moment. But yeah, there's a few other really interesting talking points about what football in general might look like this season that come out of the game beyond the two teams that were actually playing in it this weekend. Do you want to start off with a couple of those points?
I was going to say, in terms of me watching it first, I mean, I was in disbelief afterwards for a good 10 minutes. I was telling my daughter to get used to defeat as an Arsenal fan. Just before Trossard scored, what could only be described, Sam, as a worldie. 100 minutes in, and we won it on the pen lottery. It's amazing being behind for 100 minutes, which of course we'll touch on in a second. Agree with you completely. A very evenly matched game. And I think that there was kind of not too much to learn from it. I saw, Rice taking off for Nketiah was something I saw surprising a lot of people on football Twitter, at least. But it's since emerged today that Rice is carrying a knock, so he's only 75% kind of fit at the moment, but looked very comfortable, I thought, regardless. I mean, and FPL wise, I don't know. Like, I felt like it was very much City and Arsenal both setting up for each other in mind. So I don't know how that helps us understand how City are going to set up versus Burnley and Arsenal versus Nottingham Forest this weekend. And Adam Pritchard pointed out to me, for example, that Kai seems to be playing a lot of the time in an express role to nullify Rodri, for example. I don't know if we're going to see quite that level of attention to detail given to Forest players, with all due respect, like Morgan Gibbs White. And I think the only thing, really was the Foden interest dampening for a lot of people. Like, I think he quietly exited quite a few teams over the weekends.
So quietly, I completely forgot he was even a factor in it.
yeah, exactly. But if you are hunchy on him, I wouldn't give up the ghost quite yet, because playing Arsenal versus playing Burnley are very different propositions. And as we said quite a few times in pre-season, we may get leaks. But yes, I mean, there are a couple of things I think that came out which have got some relevance for FPL as well as football in general. The first one is this longer time in play. We're going back to the World Cup. Goal celebrations, time wasting, it's all going to be added on, isn't it, Sam? And I think that's going to have a real impact on presumably our defensive choices more than anything else.
Yeah, so we got a taste for it in the World Cup, and they did start dragging on a little bit. And when you apply that to FPL, you hinted at it there. Clean sheets are going to be harder to come by now. There will be more time for teams to try and make up that deficit, and more of a push towards the 90 plus minutes. Fergie time is no more, but it's now Fergie time plus another 5. This will undoubtedly have a negative impact on our mental health when we're trying to defend a clean sheet, especially if you're on City defense, because they do love conceding a late goal when maybe they're 3-0 up, 4-0 up, and concentration's a little bit lower, make a few changes and lets the team back in. I think we'll see a few more moments like that this season. And obviously in the Community Shield, we saw a 100th minute equaliser. That won't necessarily happen every single week, but it will happen a little bit more than what we have been used to, just sheerly for the fact that the ball is going to be in play for an extra 5 minutes, so teams have more time to get back into it.
Yeah, a longer game, basically. I think, to me, in FPL favours fullbacks if you're looking at things defensively, because they give you, one, a chance of attacking returns, and two, there's a better chance they get subbed off earlier, so they may lock in that clean sheet. I've got Estepinian in my mind as a player who's quite good for that. The sort of player who gets subbed off at 60, 70 mark a lot of the time if Bryson are changing shape to meet the game state. So I think that's going to be something which is going to be quite interesting going forward. And I know a lot of we both got Gabriel spoiler in our drafts later on, but I think players who do tend to get subbed off kind of around the 60, 70 minute mark are going to be really actually oddly interesting to us this year. Last year, really good thread by FPL Black Wolf on Twitter, who will be coming on the pod at some point this year when we can make it work. So obviously he's in the US. Quite a few teams last year scored in the last 10 minutes more than normal. So Newcastle, Brighton, and Brentford all scored 13 goals in the last 10 minutes. That's compared to the likes of Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth, and Palace, who only managed kind of likes of 4. Forest got 7 actually, but also West Ham got 4 too. So it's going to really vary in terms of team fitness, perhaps, and team match sharpness. I think that's
And
going to be
depth,
really,
I would say.
yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
it's going to be really interesting. And the likes of Darwin, for example, even though yes, he's not playing, hasn't played the last Liverpool friendly this evening, a player like that who does have like mad XGI per 90. I'm not saying own him, but there may come a time when he kind of makes sense to bring in for some reason, some scenario. And even if he doesn't start, you can kind of be thinking, well, okay, I haven't got 30 minutes here. If he comes on the 60 minute, I've probably got about 40. So I've kind of got near enough a half of football for him to do something. I think that's going to be something which is going to be a bit of a consideration and will hopefully kind of soften the blow, perhaps, of an attacking player being on the bench when you've got reasonable cause to think, yeah, he might come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on a really good point there about the types of teams that score late. The teams that you mentioned that only, I think, got 3 or 4 all seem to be teams that had barely any depth on the bench last year and would probably struggle to spruce things up with a late substitute. And maybe that's something we need to keep an eye on this year. Teams with that lack of depth have a much lesser chance of getting back into a game late on, whereas the teams with a lot on the bench this year, Brighton look like they've got a stacked attacking outfit from the bench coming on as well. They could be really good value for a late equaliser, late couple of goals. I think you mentioned Newcastle did it last year. Arsenal this year as well look like they've got plenty of depth on the bench. Liverpool have 5 quality attackers to pick from in any given week. So I think we can expect some late goals from the likes of them. The other thing you mentioned as well about Darwin potentially getting 30, 40 minutes here and there rather than 20 or 30. That in itself, I think, is really interesting to players that maybe were previously a little bit too scared to go towards because of that rotation threat. But also it means that from a meta point of view in FPL, our benches probably mean less than ever, and piling value onto those benches probably won't have that much benefit to our sides, because even if your player, let's go with Foden as a great example of a player that a lot of us are considering taking a risk on in game week 1. If we didn't get a leak, we didn't know whether he started or not, and you've put him in your team and hasn't started for whatever reason, he's definitely going to get 20, 30 minutes at the end. He probably will get subbed on, especially with the 5 subs and the fact that games will go on for longer. Managers will want to rotate and rest their players to keep them fresh for next week. Those 5 subs are getting used most times. I think even Pep would struggle not to use them most weeks this year. So having a deep bench probably won't mean as much unless a player is really and truly injured out of nowhere, which does happen, but I can only really name 2 or 3 times a season that I can hang my hat on and say that does happen. So having a 4 million playing defender on the bench is probably adequate most weeks, because more often than not, you're just not going to need them. Which is interesting for our drafts later on, I must say. I hadn't really considered that point until later, but it's something I'll definitely have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the other thing is yellow cards been handed out like confetti again. There's a really good stat in The Athletic that last season, 92 players were cautioned for time wasting in the Premier League, which was yellow card every 8.2 games, accounting for just 6.6% of bookings all last season. This season, in the Community Shield, we already saw the likes of Thomas Partey and Julian Alvarez being booked in the opening half for time-wasting offences, as well as Mikel Arteta being booked for slightly transgressing beyond his technical area. So I think there's going to be a definite impact as well there in terms of I think a -1, for a yellow card. I think you're going to see that more often this year, at least for the first little while, until a bit like penalties a few years ago, they kind of think, oh, hang on, this is getting a bit out of hand now. Maybe we should row it back just a tiny bit. But I think that's, again, something to bear in mind, kind of disciplinary wise, in terms of going forward. Just because, if you've got a defender or something on the yellow cards within 15 minutes, that's not the best place to be. And so maybe some nervous moments ahead for everybody. I think those are the only 2, I think, Sam.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think with the yellow cards in mind, I saw it in the Saints opening game as well. In the first half, there were 2 yellow cards for kicking the ball away, and that is going to get stamped out very, very quickly. Players will get used to it, and I think after 2 or 3 weeks, most of that will have been eradicated from the game. Either that or the referees soften up because the players won't, and we can't have 10 yellow cards a game every single week. So one way or another, that will buckle eventually, I think. But for the opening few weeks, there are some more petulant players in the league. Looking at certain Bruno Fernandes, possibly,
I was going to say
who might be due a yellow or two.
Bruno on 5 yellow cards by game week 5.
Yeah,
Imagine, I can imagine that.
But yeah, players are intelligent enough; they will get used to it. And if they don't get used to it, then the managers will certainly drill it into them after a few weeks and say, "Boy, get back in line because we can't afford yellow cards and we can't afford you getting banned after 10 games." So yeah, I think it will normalize eventually. But those opening 3 or 4 fixtures, keep an eye out.
Perfect. All right, there you go. So not very much to take from Community Shields in terms of the teams, but a few sort of maybe meta overarching impacts, which at least early on in the season may have an effect on us as managers. Game week 1 is upon us. I think it's worth just kind of quickly talking about that. What I do every year is I look at game week 1 versus a normal game week during the season, just to get an idea. Are there more goals scored in game week 1? What I've done for those listening is I've looked at the goals total across the last 8 years there, and created an average per game week versus the number of goals you tend to see on game week 1. Are there more goals scored in game week 1? Is it a goal fest? Unlike the final day, which I think the average number of goals scored was 2.5 more, on game week 1 it's 0.9 more. So there's not really much more goals scored on opening week than you'll otherwise see. I know it's very exciting, but it doesn't always tend to be the goal fest that we remember. But I think a lot of the time there are games or game weeks that stick in people's minds. I'm thinking particularly of 21-22. Do you remember when Antonio smashed it, and people with Antonio, Benrahma, I think Fernandes scored a hat-trick against Leeds, and you have Mo Salah as well, who got 17 points. Most people was captain. I think that was a year of Shimikas as well, I seem to remember, because Andy Robertson missed the game. I think loads of people came out. I think I got 96 that year. But loads of people end up with kind of 100 plus. Did you have Benrahma, you were saying earlier on? That must be one that's pretty memorable.
I had Benrahma and Antonio to start with, and I think I hit 100 club game week 1. It was either game week 1 or 2, where they just absolutely exploded, and the combination of popular players came together really well. So I think a lot of people got off to a lightning start that year. But yeah, Benrahma was gangbusters at the start of the season and then just completely fell off a cliff after that.
Yeah, Hindi Monkeys, Benrahma train. I think what's interesting though is thinking about the last kind of, I'm trying to remember at least what it was like, what it's been like the last few years, because that was, I think I'm going to say that was 2020, 21-22, I think that was. Yeah. 2021, that was the Dominic Calvert-Lewin year. And I went with Richarlison that year over Calvert-Lewin. So I was trying to outsmart, the template and all of that sort of nonsense, and obviously didn't work out very well. I remember I was doing badly, and then Reece James scored a screamer for Chelsea, and that kind of brought me up to about the kind of 70-ish. But I mean, I was down in the millions, something like that, that year. So there's the kind of 71, I think. 96 a couple of years ago, and then last year I got 80 points last year, because at the back it was ridiculous. I had Ederson and Cancelo. I remember kind of doubling up on the City defense. Not many people did do that, and that was brilliant. Gabriel and Reece James all got clean sheets, and then Salah got 12 times 2. Haaland, I started with him. A lot of people didn't start with Haaland, did the Kane to Haaland kind of switcheroo plan. So again, starting 13 points behind. And I think Martinelli also scored. And last year particularly, I was 250k after game week 1, and that was such a good foundation to just build on, because my team was pretty good. 80 points. I think the average was fairly low that year, and I already had the likes of Haaland in place when people were kind of looking to buy him in for Kane. I had kind of the double assist defense, which churned out points for me for a little while. Like, I know people, I said on the pricing pod, people hate Edison, but I have got a very good memory of Edison because I started with him and Cancelo and had, I think, over the first 5 game weeks, I had 3 clean sheets from them, which was great. And that kind of created like a really good floor for me to just kind of build on from then onwards. I mean, yeah, so it's been kind of quite changeable, but I think getting that good start last year was just the catalyst to everything. 16.8k, it's not great, but I was very happy with it after the last couple of years, which were a bit rubbish. And it's I don't know, maybe looking back at the last kind of 3 years underpinned how important it is just to get that start right, and maybe being more beige is what I did last year, which I didn't do the last couple of years. I tried to do something to outsmart the template, as I mentioned with Calvert-Lewin. Year before that, I ended up with Gundogan and Harvey Barnes when other people went elsewhere and did a lot better with that. So, yeah, be as beige as possible is my takeout from looking over the last 3 years. I mean, you tend to do quite well on game week 1, don't you? From the time I think when we were talking at the meets last time, you said that every game week 1 you tend to do all right.
Yeah, it's because I'm quite boring, I think, as well. It's quite similar to you. I don't try to mix it up too much. I've got a pretty straightforward ethos of what game week 1 is, and it's you can't win FPL in game week 1, but you can probably lose it if you're not careful. And yeah, Sam calls Tom boring. Yeah, basically. It's a difficult one because it's always really tempting to back a hunch, and I've got nothing against going with 1 or 2 of those, but the way I like to look at it is every hunch you go with against the template or against the common knowledge of the community is something that could either go in your advantage or it could massively play against you, and then it's potentially a transfer you are behind the template from game week 1, and that's on every single decision you make. And obviously we make 15 decisions at the start, well, 16 really if you add in captaincy as well. So if you're exposed to 16 different points of difference, or starting 11 different points of difference to what the template is, you could effectively be 11 moves behind if you're not careful, and then obviously you're looking at burning a wild card immediately. So I don't think necessarily it's as simple as you have to be template. It's more the chances you take, you have to be quite confident will work out for you, because the consequence could be you could end up 2, 3, 4 moves behind what the forming template is. And if that template gets off to a good start, you're going to be playing catch up until you wildcard. And that could then become really quite difficult to make up that ground later on in the season.
Yeah, definitely. But I think the example I gave about Richarlison versus Calvert-Lewin, for example, was huge, because you get to game week 1, Richarlison didn't do anything, Calvert-Lewin scored. I was like, okay, fine. Game week 2, I think it was West Brom, Richarlison got 3 assists and Calvert-Lewin scored a couple of goals. So I was like, oh, that's good. I can kind of deal with that. But then kind of it keeps going, and you keep kind of every week you kind of lose 3 or 4 points to the template because you think, oh, I want to have faith in my guy. There's an element of sunk cost fallacy. And also you're kind of making other moves because the season started and you're kind of, you're seeing this player comes to the fore, this other player puts their hand up, and you're trying to kind of make it all work together. So there's an element there of always of just, as Sam says, making sure you're not too exposed to that. And I think we'll come back to that, particularly when we talk about the drafts in just a bit. But I think first, shall we do bold claims? I think this seems like a good time to do it.
Let's do it. Yeah. So we've put together 3 bold claims each for the season that basically just for a bit of fun, but we'll have a look at them during the season at some point, see how they're getting on, because they could become quite laughable quite quickly. And then at the end of the season, we will analyze to see whether either of us have nailed anything. We do actually believe in these bold claims, or at least we did at time of writing. So hopefully 1 or 2 of them pay off and we look like geniuses. This is our marker in the sand at the start of the season, as it were, to try and prove that we know what we're talking about. Yeah, it could go very, very badly wrong. We've also got some bold claims from the community a little bit later on, specific to game week 1, and we'll be doing that each and every week throughout the season. We'll put in our own as well, and we'll do a bit of a running tally to see how the community are doing, how me and you are doing, how we are against each other, see who's ahead. But yeah, without further ado, I can't remember who's first on the bold claims. I can't remember what order I did it in. So drum roll.
Oh, here we go.
It's me. Yeah, it's the one I'm most worried about already.
Good luck.
So, to anyone listening to the podcast rather than watching on YouTube, Darwin to hit 20 Premier League goals has just appeared on screen as if from nowhere. So I wrote this earlier on before finding out that Darwin was benched, and also before finding out, before listening to the excellent latest episode of The Wire as well, where they really spoke at length about Liverpool. So do check that out as well if you get the chance. But Darwin scored 20 Premier League goals. I think he is a bit like a ketchup bottle. All it takes is one good bit of momentum going in his favor and he could just explode. Now, obviously, that is highly dependent on him getting regular starts. 20 Premier League goals is obviously a goal every other game. If he's only starting half the Premier League games, then I have an immediate issue with this claim. But if he gets into a run of form, I think it might be quite unlikely he starts the Chelsea game now, but I do expect him to start the Bournemouth game. If he can hit 2 or 3 in that game, he's then immediately harder to drop for the next game. So if he can get into that patch where he's finding the back of the net and returning on his excellent underlying data, and when I say excellent, I mean league-beating underlying data, he could be a machine. And at 7.5, it could be laughable. It is just highly dependent on him starting week in, week out, and then also being able to actually return on the underlying data. So that's why it's probably a bold claim. If he was a reliable starter, I don't think this would even be that much of a question mark, but he's not. So why don't you tear it apart, Tom?
No, I mean, it's one where you make it now and you make yourself a bit of a laughing stock if it goes wrong. But it's one that you can feasibly see happening because, as you say, he's got the ridiculous underlying data. All it would take is, we mentioned it earlier on, him to come on the 70th minute. He's got that ridiculous XGI per 90, gets a goal, gets an assist, starts the next game, and suddenly he's off. And that's not. It's not an unreasonable thing to say. I think there'll be definitely people who kind of look at it and go, "Oh, Darwin, yeah, he's a lot of crap. He couldn't hit a barn door," and that I've got some sympathy with that point of view. But the fact is, you've got quite a few decent little runs to Liverpool throughout the course of the season. I think it's game week 5 to game week 11 or 12. They don't play any team from last season's top 6. I think they've got Spurs in there somewhere. But there's a really nice little run there within which, you know what? If against, I think it's Wolves in game week 5, if I remember correctly, if he does comes off the bench against them, scores, and he's in the team for a little while, and the A team, so is it Jota, Salah, and Gakpo or whatever play, and he is the guy who is playing in the league, given that 90 minutes, builds his confidence. Like, he does seem a bit of a confidence player, especially with the sort of, just observationally, I suppose that's very anecdotal, I know, but you've got that and you've got the data. I mean, I could see this happening. I really could. It's the epitome of a bold claim, but it's a bold claim that's got legs, I think, as well. So yeah, that was the nicest non-tearing apart I've ever done, I think. That's
very kind. I think it's because I tore myself apart to start with. You felt like you had to defend me a little bit. But yeah, feel free to rip me apart to shreds on Twitter or in the comments below if you want, guys. It's absolutely fine.
We'll definitely clip this.
Yeah, I know. This is a really bad clippable episode. It's going to be humiliating for both of us. But let's move on to your first bold claim and even it out slightly. So yeah, go for it.
Yep, Trent to end up overpriced. So I mean, this is again one which has legs, or equally can make me look like an absolute fool. And I'll wear it, I'll own it if I am made to look like an idiot. And if I buy, this is not going to stop me buying Trent if it does look within that set of fixtures or something, it materializes that he's good. It's a bold claim. That's the point of bold claims, that they're not going to inhibit me in my FPL management. I'm over that. That was 7 years ago. I would have maybe kind of thought, well, I've said something on the pod, therefore I will follow it through. I think the reasoning behind this one is, we were all super happy with Trent's pricing. We both messaged each other, didn't we, Sam? Like, as soon as it came out, oh, that's a great price for Trent. It's really good, But I think what lay behind that is that we were hoping that the rise was a bellwether for a hike across the board. And when that didn't materialize, I think that this sort of claim crystallized a little bit in my mind. And I think Dan Lord on Planet FPL's correspondent week also said this as well to some extent. I think this claim comes from a couple of things. One is in terms of FPL, kind of the overall sort of matrix, the overall sort of structure. And given the depths of options open to us in defence at 5 to 5.5, one of whom I know you've got a claim about coming up, Sam, I just wonder if Trent is going to do that 8.0 justice, especially when you compare him with options again in that defensive area and also in midfield around the same price, because that's realistically who he's competing against. Because if you go with him, you have to go without one of them. And I just wonder if that's going to work. That's because of a Liverpool component of this. So Liverpool, don't seem to be able to pick up a 6. I think there's another bid rejected by, we're recording on Monday, the 7th of August, another bid rejected for Lavia today. Don't seem to want to go for Caicedo. I know Fabinho and Henderson, their legs have gone to some extent, but they've both departed. Got McAllister as the 6 potentially at the moment. But I feel less confident in that defense. It feels like very much kind of a return to heavy metal football, except without the defensive solidity. And I mentioned a couple of pods ago on that, because he really needs those clean sheets to elevate him from being a very reasonable pick to an essential pick.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening at the moment with Liverpool. Something may change by Thursday. I may have to completely reevaluate this bold claim, but I don't see it happening right now. You've also got Szoboszlai taking some set pieces as well, which may again diminish Trent's attacking returns. So yeah, I mean, the options in defence being cheaper, the same price midfielders being probably capable of similar, if not better, and make me think Trent's price looks a bit of an oddity really now. Like, it's a bit of an anomaly. He's kind of out there isolated as that 8 million defender, because the rest of the selection, the rest of the prayer list didn't really move with him. I know he was at 7.5 last year, but it didn't kind of seem to merit that, as I said on the pricing pod. So yeah, I think that he's going to be priced out for much of the season beyond double game weeks because of where he is, the team he plays for, and what's going on. So yeah, bold claim for me, 1 at least. Trent is priced out or overpriced. I'm not sure there's a nuance between the two now. I think about it. Maybe it's that he's priced out rather than being overpriced. I'm not sure whether that means slightly different things. So maybe I go with Trent is priced out. Now I've spoken about it a little bit, but you know what I mean. So yeah,
we'll remember it as that.
yeah, definitely. There's not video evidence or anything of me saying Trent me over me with
just another thing I'll be clipping later on. Yeah, I'm gonna love every second of this. Again, it sounds like we're being really kind to each other, but I do generally agree with that point. I think because Liverpool have a very small squad at the moment, I know they're still in the market for players, but they are amongst the smallest squads in the league right now. The depth that they do have is quality, but all it takes is 1 or 2 injuries and then they're really bare bones again. Trent will always be slightly reliant on those defensive returns to stockpile the points, the underlying points that marry up well with the assists and the slight goal threat as well to make him an elite asset. And without the defensive returns, or with fewer defensive returns in previous seasons, we've seen that those are his seasons where at times we don't need him in our squads. And in those seasons, he was cheaper. This season, he's 8 million. There are a lot of options all around 5.5, 5 million in great defenses who will be keeping clean sheets. And quite a few of these players at 5.5 especially will get quite a few attacking returns too. So it's a claim that I can certainly get on board with. Again, it does not mean at some points we won't be interested in having him. He's a fantastic player and he will undoubtedly be one of Liverpool's best players this season. but in terms of value, I think is the key point here. And right now, I have to say I probably completely agree with you. Right then, so let's move on to point number 3, and this should be back to me again, although I can't remember what it is. Yes, this is probably quite a bold claim again, but I think it has basis in reality. So I'm going with Ederson to be dropped at some point this season. Now, anyone who owned Ederson at any point last season can probably attest to the fact that he can at times be quite a frustrating goalkeeper to own in FPL. And I think in great part that's because he's not the best shot stopper in the world. And again, I'm feeling like I'll get dug out quite a bit on Twitter if every time he makes a good save, I think it's going to go against me. But I think there are better shot stoppers out there. He's obviously very good with his feet, but Ortega has come in, has looked more than competent at times. And I think Pep, more than most managers, is happy to make these tough choices if he has to. I think all it takes is Ederson to be out of form or have a few poor game weeks in a row for him to be slightly at risk. He is obviously an international standard goalkeeper, but Ortega is no slouch. He hasn't come in here to just make up the numbers, and keepers are inherently quite proud of themselves and quite selfish. So he will want that number 1 spot eventually if he can play well in the cups. And if he can keep a few clean sheets there, he's good enough with the ball at his feet that he could rival Ederson for number 1 spot if Ederson's shot stopping doesn't improve at some point this season. And I think Ortega may probably not start the season, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if at some point this year we're all looking at Ortega in our FPL teams because he looks like all of a sudden a nailed Man City defensive asset to own.
Yikes! I'm not sure about this one. I think that Ederson, I think Ortega was playing obviously he is the cup goalkeeper, which makes sense why he was playing in the community shield. I keep saying community shield, charity shield, whatever. I just wonder whether the distribution that Ortega has is the same as Ederson's. I think it's probably a step down really on what Ederson has got. I think that the role that Ederson plays, yes, I think I mentioned when I did when we did the pricing pod that Ederson, what he does is in terms of creating, being the base for those of attacks, which we've seen mimicked with Alisson, obviously the same, and signing Onana at Man United, Ramsdale at Arsenal too. Those sorts of goalkeepers are quite hard to come by. I think that Ortega it seems to be at least decent with the ball at his feet. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at Man City if he wasn't. It's just that he's not the same level. He's not an elite goalkeeper in quite the same way. So I'd be unsure about this one. I think you're relying a lot on a perceived drop in confidence for something to happen and for him to completely lose Pep's trust. I think that's quite a high bar to set yourself, and I just wonder about this one. I can't get behind it. Basically, I think that Ederson does do a lot, and last season a bit of an aberration, yes, but overall a very good goalkeeper for Man City in terms of what he does going forward. Normally, you've got a 1 in 2 chance of a clean sheet for Man City in their defence, and I just don't know whether we will see him suddenly be dropped at any point. I just don't quite see it happening. But at the end of last season, we did see Ortega play a little bit, and maybe that was, I don't know the full story behind that. I'm sure someone can tell me if they have listened and are saying, no, you're an idiot, you missed this. But I don't really know what the story was behind that. Maybe it was just taking out the firing line, something like that, which again kind of would be what you'd be relying on for this claim to go through. So yeah, I'm ambiguous on this one, leaning towards I'm not too sure about it, but I'm glad you've made a claim like this because it's good that we don't agree on one.
It'd be boring if we just agreed on all of them, and it is definitely a bold claim. I don't think there's a high likelihood of it happening, but I've just got a sneaky suspicion that Pep isn't too worried about changing things up if he has to. I actually think that Ortega is good with his feet. and that Pep has the ability to improve players quite drastically over a few seasons. Ortega, I think he came in last season, and now again will have a bit more time to work on the way City build up. So I think over time there's a chance that it does happen. But yeah, it's a bold claim. So
that's the whole point of these. That's the whole point of this.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let's move on to your second one. There you go.
Yeah, it's not particularly bold. Sam actually called this a beige claim when we were talking about it earlier on. But it is nonetheless perhaps talking to the state of FPL as it is. My claim is that at least two of Saka, Martinelli, Bruno and Rashford will stay in my squad for at least 30 game weeks. Spoiler alert, that's my midfield at the moment. I'm not sure it's especially bold, but looking back over the last few game week ones, other than Haaland last year, likes of Salah and Trent in years gone by, none of the players I initially picked stayed in my team for any special length of time. But this year, I think, at the very beginning in our opening hot takes pod, I can see at least two of them, that midfield four, staying in my team for the vast majority of the campaign. There's some allowance for injury, of course, and things like that. But the pricing for those players, because of I think the hangover from the year before when they were all underpriced and FPL's reluctance to really go above sort of 1.5, 2 million plus for a lot of these guys, means that they're great value, and I can't see them not staying in my team for a significant amount of time. If you do subscribe to FPL Review, for example, you'll know that Saka is now the new darling of the analytics community, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He's the highest rated midfielder, and Bruno and Rashford also are in the mix. You're looking at things like, could Bruno play further back or something like that to impact him? But the X minutes are very difficult to kind of argue against. Saka, X minutes very difficult to argue against. Rashford as well. I think his X minutes are going to be very good this year. Martinelli, yes, maybe there are some questions there about him, so maybe he shouldn't have been in this mix. But we saw him as a Community Shield, and it's not new news that he was the furthest forward player for Arsenal. Even with Gabriel Jesus, he is the furthest forward player for Arsenal. With Nketiah, slightly different, as we've discussed in the past. But yes, I wouldn't be shocked if at least two of them, maybe even three, stay in my squad for the vast majority of the season, because they're such good value. And over the course of the campaign, barring injury, I can't see them really moving out. If both teams obviously have a bit of kind of headwind, and Arsenal and Man United have a really crappy start, a la Liverpool last year, then sure, this claim's in the mud. But if both teams have a fair wind, or at least kind of just continue to stably chunter on, I think that the value is there for them. So not the boldest claim in the world, but maybe one which speaks to the incarnation of FPL we're currently enjoying.
Yeah, so earlier I did quite harshly call it a beige claim. I'll upgrade it. If it was a Nando's list, I probably had it as lemon and herb earlier. I'll upgrade it to a medium, because looking at it, those are the four players, as you said, who are in your team right now. And when you actually picture your FPL team along a season, I don't know how many of those seasons I can picture any of my midfield staying the way it is for any extended amount of time. Things will change. And I think for this claim to pay off, you're reliant on a couple of things. One, you're reliant, particularly, I think, on Saka and Rashford to hold up this claim, because I think at times you are probably going to want to get rid of Martinelli and Bruno, either because of fixtures or because of minutes for Martinelli. Sometimes might get a little bit frustrating. Perhaps another Arsenal mid like Trossard or Havertz comes to the fore. I think you're more likely to get rid of Martinelli than you would Saka in those times. And then with Bruno as well, I think it could also get a little bit frustrating when he does start sitting deep, and maybe there's 3 or 4 weeks in a row where he's not returning. And then you've got City midfielders at 7.5. You've got Maddison at 7.5. You've got Son at 9. There are a plethora of midfield options for us to pick from this season. So it might just be a case of, well, I really want this shiny new toy. and these guys have been in my team a while. Maybe they've had a few off weeks. Maybe the fixtures aren't great. I could see you moving off most of these players at times. It's whether or not 30 plus is enough to get you over the mark or not.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been 20 plus, which would be like an easy win. I think setting it to 30 at least kind of, really kind of burnishes it as a bold claim. This year, as we I think we've spoken about it a little bit, it's likely to be one of the most, I say this now, and something terrible happens and this all goes up in the air again. But as far as we know, this year is going to be probably one of the most predictable years we've had since pre-COVID. So players like that, I think, especially when we're talking about the X-Men's Kings, should at least be players who are going to be a constant in your team. You're going to give them a lot more extra leeway. And as kind of effectively cut price premiums, I mentioned with Bruno, I can't get over the fact that I happily paid 12 million for him not very long ago. I'd have happily paid 10 million probably for Saka this year. And yeah, it's just one of those really where, in terms of the game state, in terms of FPL, it's one that I think isn't as bold as it perhaps seems, but making it 30 plus, given how long the season is, you're right. There's definitely moments where I look at Martinelli, for example, and think, well, Maddison, blah, blah, blah. And Martinelli, he's got tough fixtures after game week 8, so he could be a casualty. And then suddenly I'm kind of down to Bruno, Rashford, Saka. Just don't know. But at the moment, it's one where you kind of back them in most games, apart from when they're playing each other or when either of them playing Man City.
Yeah. If this claim comes off, we're basically just going to be making transfers to that second forward all season, effectively, which is going to get really, really repetitive.
It's at least 2. So, you've still got some longevity in there. Just think about how Salah never left your team, really.
True.
Throughout the past. So that's one of them. And then you're kind of saying, there's another one who's very decent. If De Bruyne, there was a year when we were starting with De Bruyne and Sterling. I think that might have been kind of 2019-20.
Yeah, around then.
Maybe before that. If De Bruyne had stayed fit all year alongside Salah, you'd have just left that, wouldn't you? It's just one of those where it really depends. It depends on if you get a fair win behind that one. But yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right,
okay, cool.
For you.
On to my final season-long bold claim, and as you kind of nudged to earlier, it is about a defender. So I'm actually going with Chilwell to be the top-scoring defender in FPL this season. So ahead of Trent, ahead of all the City boys, ahead of everyone else. I think if Chilwell stays fit, and that is the question mark here, that's probably why it's a bold claim more than all others. I think he will be the top scoring FPL defender. I think Chelsea will be tight enough at the back to keep a decent amount of clean sheets. And when I see the positions that Chilwell gets himself into at 5.5 million as well, great value in our teams. But in terms of raw points, he's got good, significant goal threat, not just assist threat. And for a defender, that is absolute gold dust, as we all know. And the way that he talks about it and his role in the team and the way that Poch is apparently telling him to play actively really plays into my narrative that Chilwell is going to end up at the outside post, at the back post quite often. He will be cutting inside and almost playing that false winger at times, which isn't a real role, but I'm going to dub him the false winger. And I think he'll get 4 or 5 goals. He'll get equal, if not slightly more assists. And we could be looking at a real maybe 200 points. I was going to put him as a 200-point club as my bold claim, but I'm going with just top scoring defender instead in case the clean sheets don't quite hold out.
Fine. Fair play. I mean, you mentioned it straight away. Injuries. Is that going to be what is that going to be the thing that kind of holds you back really here?
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years, he's missed 58 games through injury. Ruptured his cruciate back in November 21. A couple of hamstring injuries last year, which took him out for 15 games in total according to Transfer Market. Before that, at Leicester, fairly resilient. You sort of miss the odd game here and there. Which player doesn't? Who's not called Bruno Fernandes? It's just whether that kind of begins to be a thing for him. whether you see a hamstring injury happen with a player, does that continuing niggle keep chewing away at the player? Everything else, great. I think we both said sorry for mentioning FPL review for those who aren't particularly into it, but we both said when FPL review came out that we're both shocked at how much it rated Chilwell. And I think that kind of maybe has led to where we're going to be in a minute in terms of our drafts as well. Say our drafts. Oh, that's massive. You know what I mean?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to. It's one where again, if there's a fair wind, I can see it happening because of all the reasons you've described. False winger, inverted winger, whatever. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how he goes. But yeah, he's one that at 5.5, again, linking back to my Trent claim, who could feasibly end up in that area of 200 points. It really depends if Chelsea do have that defensive solidity. I think Poch will probably sort them out around November, and then maybe we'll go on a little bit of a run. They've got the early sort of fixtures to keep to kind of build a foundation. Yeah, I quite like this one. I think I can definitely see it happening as we stand right now. It's just whether that continues. You've also got everybody who's beholden to Reece James Stockholm syndrome, wondering why you aren't mentioning him.
I can't do that to myself. Not again. He just seems like he is too injury prone. Whereas Chilwell, I think, has been slightly unfortunate that he's had bad injuries that have kept him out for a while. Whereas Reece James, every other week, it seems to be a different issue. And then a few larger ones that are added in as well. I think if Reece James can stay fit, then he's just as likely as Chilwell to be top point scorer even in FPL, but I've just got less faith in James staying fit at this current moment in time.
Fair play. Right, final one for me then.
Come on then. Right, number 3 for you, and this is one I do actually agree with, so go for it.
Yeah, Ollie Watkins to join the 200 club. You let me have this one, which is very kind. But
I did, yeah.
I've been pretty keen on Watkins since the season began, and he was one that was in mind for me, I think, at the end of last year as well. I'm fairly sure we had a conversation about that at some point. That I think he'd be really interested in. I listened to Lee Jackson on Planet FPL's correspondent pod for Villa. Really interesting to hear him, and pleasing as well to hear him echo the points I was making about how the team's set up to service him, how he focuses his energy in and around the box now rather than drifting wide, dropping deep. And as I said the other week, it kind of feels like he's a bit of an incarnation of Jamie Vardy in some ways. But I just think as long as he stays fit and Emery's system continues to reap the rewards for them, they're not too distracted by Europe, he could hit the 200 mark. And he's got the 8 minutes on his side. He's got basically being the main man. You've got Cameron Archer, a young striker who did very well in the Championship last year, but still, unproven as the number 2. You don't really have like the easy sort of transition. So he's going to be playing Kane style. He's going to be playing, and I think that's going to be very good for him. I don't know. There's not too much more to say on this. Villa's talisman, the whole system set up to support him. I've already popped out a clip on Twitter about him. What can you do?
Yeah,
very much. Obviously, we've had the injury to Nkunku, which we saw tonight. In the few places on X is being described as a few months, and that removes that one. And yeah, I mean, I just think starting with Watkins, just kind of saying, you know what, mate, you just do your thing. I'm just going to leave you there. Very much like Jamie Vardy again. He was very much that sort of player back in his sort of heyday. You just owned him. You left him there. Yeah, there are a few blanks here and there, but you're okay. Every week there was a goal. Every other week there was a goal. You expected him to kind of drip along, and I think Watkins could well do that. And those things add up. Not every game's gonna be a Newcastle game like last year, where he comes out with double digits. But scoring one goal every game is like a realistic possibility for Watkins, I think. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's important to note that he wasn't exactly far off the 200 club last season, and he wasn't even a factor for most of us for at least half of the season until Gerrard left. So this is a player that I think it was 175 points last year. 2 or 3 more goals with a couple of bonus points in there, and you're pretty much there. And I think that's very realistic to expect for someone that is a 90-minute man. I think he still will be on penalties. I personally think he'll get one more chance before Tielemans might take them over, but I don't think Tielemans is necessarily starting every single week or always on the pitch anyway. So even if he was to officially take pens off of him, he might still get a few here and there. And when you look at Aston Villa as a unit now, they've got so much creativity, not only in their starting 11, but also coming off the bench to just consistently be feeding Watkins with chances for the entire 95 to 100 minutes. And again, that extra 5 minutes could really pay off for someone who is playing every single minute this season in getting him across the line to 200 points from the 170, 180 that he's at the moment. So yeah, really like this one. I would have taken it myself as well.
Sorry.
I hope no, it's absolutely fine. Watkins is your boy, and I probably was inspired by your comments previously anyway, so it's only fair. And yeah, I think that one really wraps up the bold claims for now. I think that's probably the one I'm most confident on moving into the start of the season. And maybe by the time we get to game week 38, we'll have a look back at this. He'll have already hit 200 points and we can jointly have a little mini celebration knowing that we kind of both wanted this to happen. But it would still technically be your point.
For sure. Right. Well, so should we do the for game week 1? I think what we'll do this year is every week, if it does happen, we'll get a point each for the bold claims and for the community as well. I think what we should do, Sam, maybe is we nominate. We'll read out a few and maybe nominate one that we think is. I don't know. Maybe this is a dictatorship. It's our pod, so we can decide. So, but
we'll basically, what one don't we think is going to work?
No, we're not going to do that. We'll nominate one that we'll take into the week with us, and then have kind of Tom, Sam, FPL X, and kind of just kind of keep track of it throughout the campaign, as we said on the very first pod back. I think that would be a good way of doing it. So in advance of game week 1, where are you? What's your bold claim? Is it me?
Well,
is it you, or is it me first?
It might be you first. It is you first. Do you wanna kick it off?
Yes, so Brentford versus Spurs to have 6+ goals, and none of us to own any of the players in it. Maybe Mbemo, but I think he's also got a knock, hasn't he? He came off after 30 minutes in one of the friendlies, but I think Frank has said that he was precautionary, got taken off. Worryingly, Andy Martin agrees with me about this one. He said there will be 6+ goals in the Brentford versus Spurs games, and that's always a reason to doubt your very existence. Sorry, Andy, I love you. I mean, I think that's the game. With Spurs just seem to be akin to Liverpool, really, in the we're going to score one more than you. We're going for it. From every interview with Postecoglou, it very much seems like he wants the ball, wants to attack, and defence. It's not an afterthought, but it's something, especially to James playing at FPL as well, which I do a fair bit this week, an awful lot. And it just seems like that's going to be how they kind of run things, that they're going to be very exciting to watch, but not necessarily the most solid team at the back. And Brentford too, very clever. Thomas Frank always sets up very nicely to combat teams no matter how they play. And if they've got a team that they're anticipating is going to go for it, they're going to match them punch for punch. And I think that game is going to be a very, very interesting game. Spurs on the ball, pushing forward, Brentford on the counter. So I think that's going to be 6+ goals in that particular game. Normally, I think the claims are going to be more kind of around one player or something, something kind of a bit more sort of outlandish, I think, as we go forward. I know this one, again, is probably the beige early claim. Sorry, Andy, you're not beige. But I think this is going to be my kind of initial gambit to start us off in this bold claims era.
Yeah. I don't think it's too beige. I think picking 6+ goals in any game is tough to do. So yeah, if you looked at like the odds for 5.5 or over, I think it would be a good few to 1. So yeah, I think it's bold enough.
So it's a 0-0 now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's totally a 0-0. Yeah,
especially because Andy said it. I mean, that's
Andy. Without blowing too much smoke, Andy is very good at the matchups as well. So knowing that he's on that as well, I can certainly see it happen. Like you said, Brentford will try and counter that high line as well with pace. They've got plenty of pace in behind. I could certainly see this one being a bit of a goal fest. So yeah, don't mind this one as a bold claim. You could be off to a good start there. I will move very quickly on to mine, just so we don't run over too much. And mine is that Villa get off to a lightning start. They've looked fantastic in pre-season, and obviously the back end of last year, fantastic as well. They got the better of Newcastle last time, and I think they'll do it again. I've got Villa to beat Newcastle by 2 or more goals in the opening fixture. What do you think of that?
Well, I'd love this to happen because obviously I'm hoping that Watkins' talismanic status means that he's going to get us off to a flyer. And I think it's interesting with Newcastle because they're the team that many people look at for the top 4 race and think they're going to drop off, not going to do as well. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Newcastle deal with this renewed expectation upon them. Last year, Villa did absolutely demolish them. Is that going to happen again? Or is there going to be an element of, oh, crap, it's these guys, as I said last week?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can see that one happening. I hope it happens because I own Newcastle defender and I own Watkins. But, it's one of those where is it because I'm being subjective versus what's actually going to happen in that game? But yeah, I think that's a really interesting one to throw out there. I'll be intrigued to see if it happens, basically. I know that's very neutral, but there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to play devil's advocate very, very quickly on this, Newcastle will want to get one back over Villa, considering what happened last season. So yeah, they will want revenge. I just have a feeling Villa will come out the traps really quickly this season. Yeah, I've got them to beat Newcastle by 2 goals. Fingers crossed it comes off for any Watkins owners. Nothing against Newcastle. I think they'll have another great season, but I think Villa are looking pretty good to start the year. So that's the way I'm going with the bold claim for game week 1. What about the community? Perfect. What are they saying?
Well, there's a few really interesting ones here, which I'm not going to read them all, but thank you so much for everybody who did write in. There's a couple of people who are obviously going against the expected. Jimmy the Claret, obviously Jimmy's going to do this because he's a Burnley fan. Burnley will win. The stage is set. The narrative is written. It's happening. And I also saw from elsewhere that Burnley, FPL follow that Burnley keep City to just 1 goal, a Rodri goal. So I think the bold claim to kind of summarise it is that Burnley versus City is not going to be the game that we all expect it to be. I mean, Haaland's gone 6 games without a goal. That's potentially one. There are a few other people saying, FPL Gem, for example, Salah scores a 20-pointer and suddenly is right in the template for everybody there. I mean, I think we're all scared of that, really. If you're
that would cause chaos.
I know. And there's a couple of other people. So FPL Cobaloy, Man United won't score against Wolves, and FPL Twitter will react very calmly. And Atlas FPL says that Onana will score an own goal. So there's a few other things there. A couple of others. Oh, Camran in that Burnley game says that Haaland will blank, but he says he's captaining him out of FOMO. Aston Villa got off a good start, says Nave Jacobson. So very similar to you, Sam. And what's the other one that I saw? Yes, Tom Campbell, USCTC, friend of the pod. Dom Solanke will end game week 1 as the top scoring player of the game week, which I really like. So that's a very sort of that's a bold claim. I'm a big fan of that one.
I could get on board with that. That would be very funny, and I'd like to see how everyone reacts to. Is he 6.5? I think he's 6.5.
I think he is, shockingly. Yes, yeah. I think there are a few that. I know there are loads more there, and as I said, thank you so much for people who have mentioned them. I was laughing for a little while when Michael Lowe said Edison will make a save was his bold claim. I again chiming with your bold claims earlier on, but I don't know. I wonder whether we take Tom's one there.
Yeah, I quite like Tom's one. Yeah, I like that. It seems just about feasible enough to be within the realms of possibility. But yeah, it's definitely still a bold claim, possibly slightly more bold than ours as well. So maybe we need to up our game for next week. But yeah, I like that.
Cool. I think we'll take that. We'll take that for now.
Fantastic.
And we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we need to try to crystallize all of these into kind of 3 top bold claims going forward, rather than just picking one at random for the one that makes us laugh. But I like that. Well, thanks, Tom. We'll go with you. You are the FPL community. You're the mayor of FPL. Right. Okay. Let's
on to the next. And I think we're into our drafts now. If I don't.
God.
Yeah. So you're first. So I don't think it'll make too much difference. But Tom, why don't you read out your draft ahead of game week 1 at the moment?
I think we need to just quickly discuss what's going on here. Let's just do that.
Yeah, maybe.
I think the start of an FPL season. One thing that I've learned happened last year, and I've observed loads of people doing it the years before, and I've overthought it. But the start is always actually pretty beige. Is a bit of a secret, but everybody now knows because there's loads of beige. Anyway, but there's overexcitement because it's all back, and it's all exciting. The football's coming, but in terms of FPL, the start is always massively overhyped. So I've said for a long time, like pre-season is my least favorite part of the season. It's loads of content for content's sake. I think that's what we do, but there's a lot of that out there, and I'm pretty glad we're coming to the end now, and we can come to the action, and we can truly begin to differentiate, and the actual skill element, which I fully accept I've been poor at in the past, comes into play. Sam and I will definitely diverge before long, but at the moment we've both ended up on pretty much the same, well, exactly the same 11 as happened last year with Lucy, who's again similar to Sam and similar to how I converted to be, in that it's very kind of safe, secure, you know what you're doing. So I think our draft, I think we're going to call it, Sam, here, is a Nana in goal, Areola / maybe Matt Turner if he goes to Nottingham Forest, and Henderson doesn't follow quickly as the second goalkeeper. At the back, you've got Gabriel, Stones and Estepinian on the pitch. You've got Chilwell as first sub, just because the Liverpool game, we'll talk about that in a minute. I think it's just Liverpool game is likely to herald goals, and when it's difficult to kind of weigh him up against another player who's in the draft at the moment. And Bayer at Burnley is probably the defender of choice. I know that Baldock at Sheffield United is the one that FPL Review recommends, but Sheffield United are currently selling their best player, Sander Berge, to Burnley. There's a real sort of sense of malaise there with ownership situation, etc. So he's what's there. In midfield, it is that 4: Saka, Martinelli, Bruno Fernandes and Rashford. We are not in a 3-5-2. We are in a 3-4-3. So I've got Nakamba. I think you've got Anderson at the moment, but we're not too sure what that's going to be again. And up front, it is Erling Haaland, shock horror, with the armband on. Ollie Watkins, again, shock horror. And João Pedro, who is making up the 11 at the moment. Obviously, game week 2, game week 3, depending on what happens against Luton in game week 1, Chilwell will come on and João Pedro will then become that sort of first sub character. But I think that's kind of where I am. I know that's where you are. And there are a lot of players in here who at the moment are simply locked in. Feels ridiculously silly, but I've got to the point now already where, as I said a second ago, I'm so ready for game week 1. I think it's a good thing that I'm in a place where I'm just like, you know what, I'm quite happy with this. Like Anana, yes, I know there's some questions. I know he got lobbed from the halfway line, etc. But I still think he's probably the best goalkeeper. Decent saves and decent save percentages. I know it was Serie A, but whatever. But the passing and distribution hopefully will lead to a bonus, at least being in the bonus discussion. Gabriel, Stones' opinion. Yes, again, Estepinian, perhaps slightly a concession to EO, but 50% EO for a Brighton player is, with those first 3 fixtures, is very hard to talk against. Saka, Martinelli, Bruno, Rashford, spoken about that already, and then Watkins spoken about already. Haaland, are you going to argue against that? And then there's João Pedro. So we'll talk about João Pedro in a minute, but it's one of those where I don't know. I kind of put this together, was it on I think it was on Sunday when João Pedro scored the penalty. And
Yeah.
you gave me the "you wouldn't steal an FPL draft" meme.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, it was as soon as Pedro scored the penalty and it with Gross on the pitch as well, that kind of our paths converged a little bit. And we all along we've been maybe 2 or 3 players separate in our drafts, but those 2 or 3 players have dropped off the scene in the last few days, and certain other picks, Martinelli being one, Watkins being another, Pedro being another, have all become more and more popular through groundswell, through injuries elsewhere, and through new information coming to light, such as the penalty factor for Pedro. And I know for a fact we both really wanted to try to find a way to get Chilwell in. And I think Pedro being on penalties just allowed us to maneuver that extra 1 million, or at least in my case, that extra 1 million out of a 6.5 million midfielder, replace the 4.5 forwards with a 5.5 in Pedro, and then obviously downgrade the 6.5 midfielder to a 4.5, giving us the extra 1 million to add to the 4.5 million defender that I think previously for me was Colwill, but we were playing around with a few different names in our chat prior to this weekend. I think Colwill was there, but even though he's got a bit of goal threat from set pieces, Chilwell just feels worth it for that million extra. And I think we're going to want to be on him by game week 3 or 4 when the fixtures improve for Chelsea. So this for me is the draft that I keep coming back to now. And I think the fact that it does have at least one good bench option every single week, if there's a little bit of rotation headache, like who's your first bench going to be, but I quite like having just one bit of depth in the opening few weeks in case new information comes to light and we're shocked by something and we then don't need to panic into making a move straight away. We can rely on our bench just a little bit. Pedro, I think, is the key that unlocks the rest of this draft, and that's how our paths have converged in the last 24 hours or so.
Yeah, I think obviously João Pedro, yes, signed from Watford, record signing, not played in Premier League before, but not to any great effect. A very good foot manager, by the way. Not that should impact anybody. But as Sam said, if you've got a player like that, 5.5, who you can reasonably expect as the record signing that Kudu is being linked to them very heavily. But the player who has 3 very good opening fixtures, you keep that Brighton coverage for Luton, Wolves, West Ham. Although maybe for the West Ham game, you then play Chilwell over João Pedro. You've got an idea of what's going on. But it's for game week 1, you've got that kind of attacking cover for the Luton home game, which I think is going to be a game that, without any prior knowledge, we're going to be targeting. With all of that in, I think you're kind of mostly there. There's going to be a couple of changes, obviously, that could be kind of discussed going forward. But I mean, it's one of those drafts that once you've done it, you're kind of sat there thinking, I'm not too sure where else I'm going to go from this, given what we've spoken about over the last kind of 4 weeks in pre-season and all the other thoughts and things that we've put out there. I know, Sam, on your videos as well, you've put out those different kind of thoughts and had those ideas about what you could do, where you could go. I know you've got a soft spot for Gakpo, for example.
I do.
You just keep, it's one of those that I just keep coming back to. And I know that, for example, I said in pre-season a little while ago that my take was that why wouldn't you go 3-5-2? Why wouldn't you go without a midfielder? But you've got everything sort of covered off here, which I quite like. You're embracing the beige to some extent. I kind of also think that we had kind of the FPL review sort of nod when it came to Chilwell, just because I think I didn't really anticipate how well that rated him. I know that that's not for everybody, but for me, that the good fixtures from game week 3 onwards made me just think, you know what, it's good to just have him there, and we'll see what happens from that point onwards.
Yeah, agreed on the Chilwell point. I was quite bullish on him anyway, and then review really tipped me over the edge and made me feel like I need to actually back up this data and my hunch as well by trying to squeeze him into my team wherever possible. It's important to say that there are sacrifices to this structure. Obviously, no Liverpool coverage is a worry, and I think that's a sacrifice we're both currently prepared to make. But Watkins could feasibly be a Darwin or a Gakpo, or one of the midfielders. In fact, any of the midfielders could be a Jota, for instance, if you were that way inclined. Obviously, Salah would take significant sacrifices to squeeze into this draft, and I think we've both had to play around with trying to make that work. And I personally just can't without what I would consider to be too many sacrifices elsewhere. And yeah, and Kane is the other big one. Obviously, looks to be red hot in pre-season and might now be staying, considering Bayern's bids kept being knocked back earlier this week. So only time will tell with him. But if you can find a way to squeeze Kane in, that might be a way to really mix up this template or this draft. But again, having a look at trying to fit him in means that Watkins is out straight away. And I think Watkins, as we've mentioned, will be a very good pick this season. You're not finding 7 million an upgrade from Pedro to Kane. You're not finding 7 million in this team elsewhere, I don't think. So it would have to be for Watkins. And even then, you need to find another 4.5 million somewhere. And that just seems like such a massive amount of money to take out of this side. You're taking 1 million out of at least one of the defenders, probably 2.5 million out of one of the midfielders, and then probably downgrading Pedro as well to a 4.5 to make that even feasible. And then you're probably left with not too much cover on the bench. You're probably left with a weaker starting 11 in the hope that without ever captaining this other premium player, they are going to match up to all of the other players you've sacrificed. And as far as I'm concerned right now, I can't make it work. I don't know about you, but yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. And I think I'm fairly set on going without a second premium into game week 1.
Yeah, I'm the same, because I think the likes of Saka, likes of Rashford, those are cut price premiums as far as I'm concerned. Like if Haaland missed the game or whatever, I think that I'd be happy to captain one of those guys. So it's not a problem for me. Like, it's the price quality heuristic thing where you equate price to mean something's quality, like buying a very expensive phone when a decent phone will do the job that you want it to do. You don't need that. So yeah, it's all, I don't know, I feel like obviously we'll see what's going on, and obviously we're not advocating that everybody follows this draft, but I think it's a very solid one that I like and that you like, and we may well find that by Thursday things will have changed a slight bit, and we'll obviously update you on that. But it's one of those where it feels like just a good way to start the season. Obviously, it's a big regret there's no money in the bank, and if a 6.5 million midfielder became one that you had to own by game week 2, that's perhaps one that maybe there's going to be a lack of flexibility potentially. But I think we'd at least give it 2 weeks and see what would happen in game week 3, because game week 1 and game week 2 both look very strong for this particular setup. So it's one where you look at it and you think, you know what, give us 2 weeks. It looks very good for game week 1. Almost like it's obviously not completely the free hit that you make, but pretty close. And game week 2, see how it goes after that. I think, unless something outlandish happens where you see Bruno playing the DM or something like that. You got Kane, you've got Salah, you've got Darwin over Watkins, essentially, as you mentioned. You've got the likes of Jackson, who could be in a consideration, but you're looking at Chilwell basically playing a similar role to Trent in being an attacking option at 5.5 in the defence. I think basically this team ends up as a 4-4-2 eventually with João Pedro as sub 1. But I think it works. It basically works, and I quite like that. And it's one of those where you look at it. I think you said to me, I haven't got that many notes on this, which is very key, because whenever we were firing over each other drafts and thinking, oh, you know what about this? We both kind of had, what about this? What about that? It's not groupthink, I think, but it might be. But it's very difficult to put past it. And then if you run it through the algos, obviously a little bit of X-Min engineering when it comes to João Pedro. But even if he's at 60 minutes at 5.5, that's very good for their opening fixtures. So there you go. Captain Haaland, Sam. I mentioned about going with or without. You mentioned about going with or without a hunch at one point. I mean, the FPL review seems to be pushing people towards Saka for game week 1. If you guys on Twitter, if another FPL on the boo, for understandable reasons saying, this could be a huge opportunity that, if you get it wrong, then you've got to make up a little bit every week, and it's all doable. But it just feels like massive exposure to me to not go with Haaland. I know that's, again, really beige, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think if Haaland had even a slightly worse fixture, I'd be more tempted. But Burnley away, it is a promoted side. They'll want to get off to a good start. And Haaland's EO, again, it's boring to say, but it will be very high. So you have to be very confident of your pick if you're backing against it. I do like Saka at home to Forest. I do. To be fair, I like Martinelli at home to Forest as well, albeit without the penalties. But I think if you're going up against Haaland, he needs a slightly worse fixture for me anyway, to back against it, even though Forest do look like they'll be conceding a few early season. Obviously, they'll probably be bringing in a keeper this week and probably putting them in the starting lineup fairly soon. So bedding them in is going to be difficult. But I think for me, Haaland's probably the gut call for me.
Cool. Yeah, I think the only question is the 4.0 defender and the 4.5 million midfielder on the bench, which hopefully will be answered this week to some extent. And if it isn't, it's not massive. At the end of the day, I know you've got Kabore versus Bayer. I've got Nakamba versus Anderson, but it's apples and apples, really, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, I'll be doing the necessary background research on those 2 price points in the coming days, which is probably the least exciting part of FPL research, but it needs to be done. I will try and pick the ones that I'm most confident on. Anderson's looked good in preseason, and Kabore looks like he'll be playing, at least, I hope, in a fullback role for Luton, which is the only reason they're in my draft at the moment. But other than that, I don't think there's any reason to look too far beyond that. I think the research needs to be done, but that's this week, and we'll figure it out by Friday.
No, I think it's actually quite a good thing to be quite happy about where we are at this point. And I think that, any final words of advice, I suppose, as we round off the pod, as we go into game week 1. I know it's only just kind of 4 days away at this point, but yeah.
My final bit would be, don't panic. The team you're on at the moment is probably there for a reason. You probably know what you're doing at this point. Don't let one little bit of information completely tear apart your draft, or like fear of one player, for instance, tear apart your draft completely. Write down why you've got the draft you've got at the start of this week, and then, as if it was between 2 game weeks, have a look at what your draft is right now, write it down, figure out the logic behind that draft. At the end of the week, when it gets to Friday and when it gets to the crunch, have a look back at what it was at the start of the week. Ask yourself, realistically, what information have we gained that's changed the drafts? And if it's good information, by all means, go with the new draft. But more often than not too much has changed. So figure out where you're at the start of the week, and don't panic too much with every little bit of information. Take on the most important bits only.
Bastard stole my line. Yes, that's exactly mine as well. But yes, there's definitely going to be, as we get into the madness of just the final few days of pre-season before we're all locked in and ready to go, some bandwagon will crop up, and it's very much about taking yourself away from that and interrogating the differences between the drafts today, your final team, and maybe your first draft as well, and just kind of asking yourself what changed, what you know now, whether you're happy with the changes you've made, or whether it's kind of perhaps driven by external forces which are forcing you to maybe think about a certain player more than you probably otherwise would. I think ownership is always important. Game week 1, there's no getting around it. There are players like, I've seen loads of very, very good kind of reasoning against someone like Estepinian, for example. Makes a lot of sense going against Brighton, and people saying Brighton defense very leaky, and at the end of last season, and Estepinian scored loads of points in one game versus Arsenal, but didn't really tend to score very much otherwise. Yeah, true, but the guy's owned by 50%, more than 50% of the current player base. Against Luton, if they keep clean sheet and he gets 9 points, or even gets stack and return, gets 12, you're in the hole immediately, as Sam mentioned earlier on. That's something which is like, do you need to take that risk? You need to take somebody on. If you really believe in your hunch, fair enough, fine. I'm very happy for you to do that. I'll back you all the way. Do what you need to do. But there's an element of always of picking your battles when it comes to game week 1. It's not the most exciting thing in the world that we've both got the same team. It's not the most exciting thing in the world that most people on FPL Twitter will end up with the same team, or FPL threads, Instagram, whatever. But it is a template for a reason, and they are players who have been chosen for a reason. They're not kind of in because there's content creators trying to lead you astray. There's lots of thought that goes into it, and there's a reason why these players look to be players that are worth owning. So a lot of the time, as I said, I think last week on the Lessons Learned pod, it's a lot about letting other people make mistakes. Don't be that person who gets led astray, I suppose, on some sort of niche pick, and you're left, if it goes well, great, you're a genius. But a lot of the time in this game, you're not going to be a genius. You're going to be left behind if you've gone against a Rashford because for some reason you think, hey, you know what, he's not as good as X, Y, and Z. Yes, we've got some worries about him being the centre forward. Is that as good? But if he scores a couple of goals against Wolves, which is likely, I'm not saying that the Stones or something's going to come on and do a 20-pointer against Burnley. I just don't. It's one of those where there's definitely the compulsion, perhaps, to fight against the majority view, but that kind of thing can append your season. As loads of people have said, you don't win game week 1. You don't win FPL on game week 1, but you can lose it. So yeah, bear that in mind. That's where I am now.
Absolutely. And I think that wraps us up very nicely for the end of our final preseason pod. Thank you all so much. If you've listened to any of the pods or watched the videos in preseason, we really do appreciate it. We're excited to get going. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Twitter/X at WGTA_FPL. You can find me on X at FPL Pricey. Or you can find us on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL. Again, I'm FPL Pricey on there as well. Once again, the mini league code, if you wanted to join us for that, it was MINLUD. And if you enjoyed the pods, we'd really appreciate it if you could do one or all of the following, such as giving us a follow on those social media channels, giving the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to it would be fantastic. And if you're here on YouTube, then if you could subscribe or give the video a like, that would be greatly appreciated. That really helps get the pod out there for a wider audience. But in the meantime, good luck everyone for game week 1.
Yep. Thanks, Sam. Did you enjoy preseason? It's your first time doing this.
I did very much. I've really enjoyed it. It's been very good to help me hone in my thinking for the weeks ahead. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we'll drum that out with you as the season goes on. So hey, we're back with you next week as the dust settles, talking about how it invariably all went wrong for all of us. But nonetheless, we hope you enjoyed the pods. I hope you're on board for the rest of the season. As Sam said, do all of those things. Very, very helpful for us. But more than anything, we hope we assisted you during pre-season. All the best in game week 1. We'll speak to you very, very soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?